President and member of the Board of Directors of CARY, as well as a parent of 3 HCPSS students. Thank you all for joining here in person, streaming online, or watching a recording of the forum. We hope that this event helps you become more informed about the candidates and their positions as we move towards election time. CARY is a nonprofit organization based here in Howard County, and we will work with allies within the school system to advocate for the safe and affirming learning environment for LGBTQ youth, raise awareness of LGBTQ issues, increase understanding of youth experiences across the LGBTQ community, and provide resources and support for LGBTQ allies. CARY is proud to run or partner with other organizations to run a wide range of affirming programs, including the Read the Rainbow Book Club with HCPSS Tribe, an LGBTQ category in the POCO Student Film Festival, and our own Rainbow Ribbon program that seeks to recognize and support those schools that are working hard to actively affirm LGBTQ students. Participants, microphone note, if you find your mic muted, press the gray button to turn it back on. There's no need to turn them on and off in between questions. This process of voter education began back in May with a written candidate survey sent to all the candidates who were running for the Board of Education primary. The questionnaire was emailed to candidates at the email addresses listed on the Maryland State Board of Elections website, and candidates were given 1 month to respond. Of the advancing candidates, we received responses from Ms. Trudy Adler, Ms. Jackie McCoy, and Mr. Dan Newberger. Thank you very much for participating. And these responses were published in their entirety and are still available on the CARY website, cary-poco.org. An invitation to participate in today's forum was emailed on August 5th to all 4 candidates who advanced past the primary election, and we are pleased to have all 3 of you joining us here today. With a special thank you to the Howard County Library System for the space we are using for the forum here today. As a reminder, CARY is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and as such, does not endorse political candidates in any way. This forum is being hosted for informational purposes only. And with that, I turn it over to the President of Community Allies of Rainbow Youth and our moderator today, Ying Matties.
Thank you, Matthew. Good morning. My name is Ying Matties. I usually pronounce she, her. It is my privilege to serve as a moderator for today. First, a few ground rules before we begin. We ask that everyone in the room please turn off your cell phone and other electronic devices. As per federal regulations and adopting the League of Women Voters guidelines with regard to conducting a candidate forum, we will not allow any audio or video recordings of the event except for those conducted by designated CARY members. We will begin with opening statements from the candidates. Each candidate will have 1 minute. Our timekeeper, right there, will remind you when there's 30 seconds left and when your time is up. After the opening statements, I will ask questions and each candidate will have 1 minute to respond. If any clarifying questions or follow-up questions are necessary, candidates will be given 30 seconds to respond. And we will rotate sequence so you don't have to always be the first one to answer. We will not be taking any audience questions. All right, now we will begin today's event with the opening statements from candidates. Let's begin that with Mr. Newberger.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks so much to CARY and to everyone for being here today on this beautiful fall morning. Thank you for spending time with us Board of Ed candidates to learn more about this critical race. I always like coming to this building. I love libraries. I love this library. When my kids were little, they called this the Froggy Library because of the statues out in front. So I'm glad to be here in the Froggy Library with you all. My name's Dan Newberger. I've got 2 kids in the district, a 4th grader at Swansfield Elementary, a 7th grader at Harper's Choice. And my family moved here to Howard County for the reason so many of us do, for among many other things, for the schools, for the inclusive and diverse place that Howard County is. We have a legacy of amazing schools in this county, and our schools are still amazing. But honestly, we've been coasting on that reputation for too long, and we've been complacent for too long in the central office. And we're in real danger of slipping, of having real hardship and adverse conditions in our schools because of things that we have or haven't done for a long time. So we need strong leaders on the board, and I'm excited to talk all about it.
Thank you. Ms. McCoy?
I'm trying to be safe because I've been doing this a lot. I don't know if it's the weather or what, but I just want to make sure that I'm not spreading COVID or anything else. So I'm going to keep my mask on as much as possible. My name is Jackie McCoy, and I have lived in Howard County for 25 years, in Maryland for 40. I came to Howard County with my 3 children and my husband, and I've formerly been a homeschooler, tutor, involved in private school education, and I realized when I got my master's degree in education that when I applied for a job here, it took forever. And I realized that the system really is difficult to get into. I finally did get in. But Howard County's system, as Dan was saying, has some issues, and you really don't know it until you lift the covers. And so I'm here as an educator because no one else who ran for the board was a secondary education person, and I believe that there needs to be an educator on the board. As a mechanical engineer, I bring that kind of thinking and problem solving. I am a problem solver, no nonsense person, and I believe that I will make an excellent candidate, an excellent board member. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Adler?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today. My name is Tootie Adler. I've been in Howard County for 40 years. We raised both our children here, and I have 2 grandchildren that are in the system now. I'm concerned about the school system, as are many other parents. After generations with a stellar reputation, HCPSS is in decline, and our parents know it. Our teachers know it. The students are in flux in unruly classrooms and hallways. Proficiency scores are low. The decisions made by the current board are not focused on children's safety or core education. The last redistricting made national news for the fiasco that it was, and it didn't address in any measurable way the overcrowding. COVID. Our board could not agree when the schools would open, and parents were so worried about the mental health of their children and their livelihood at the very same time. Finally, back in school now, we're dealing with ramifications of the last couple of years. We have to get back to basics and refocus on education in a safe environment. Our students are depending upon us to make sure they're prepared for the next steps. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We now begin the question and answer portion of the forum. We will begin the first question with Ms. Adler. Here's the first question. Currently, HCPSS has a guideline for supporting transgender and gender nonconforming students. The first sentence in the section entitled Names/Pronouns reads as the following. A student has the right to be addressed by a name and pronoun that corresponds to the student's gender identity. Do you agree with this statement? And if so, do you believe this should be made into a policy?
Thank you for the question. I do agree that if a child feels strongly they want to use the pronoun, and we can certainly respect that. I think we might need to give some consideration to policy to make sure that we think it through carefully. I haven't really thought about it in terms of policy, but if a child is comfortable using pronouns, I'm in complete support of it.
Thank you. Ms. McCoy?
I think this is the question that everybody, she didn't answer the question about whether you agree with the policy or not. Well, yes, I agree with the policy. As an educator in my classroom, it was never an issue for my students to share their identity. And I don't think that it has been an issue in most classrooms, but you have policies in place for people who don't necessarily agree with positions. And the policies are there to be a support for those who may have problems with expressing themselves. And so for me, I see no problem with the policy. In my classroom, it was always an environment where children felt that they could be who they are. And so the policy is just there for those who may not necessarily want to support a student in their identity. And so yes, I agree with the policy, creating a policy.
Thank you, Mr. Newberger.
I'm absolutely, can you hear me? I'm absolutely in support of us doing this and everything else we need to do to make sure our schools are welcoming and inclusive places for our trans and non-gender conforming students. And to me, this is a core education issue, right? Kids have to feel safe and welcome in the classroom to learn. And so yeah, it absolutely needs to be enshrined in policy. We need to make sure that these way of respectfully and inclusively handling our students can't be dismantled easily by folks who don't agree in the basic dignity of every student, like most of us in this room do. So I think we need to really make sure that the policies are right. But policies are easy, right? That's words on a paper. We really need to make sure that the folks in the schools are carrying out the spirit of this policy, which is safe, inclusive spaces for students. So that goes to teacher training, that goes to, like so many things do, it goes to the leadership in the schools. Are our principals the strong leaders we want them to be and need them to be, looking out for all of our kids, and especially the vulnerable kids like our trans and non-gender? So absolutely yes.
Thank you. I just want to add a little note for people in the audience, or maybe candidates who don't know the difference between guideline and policy. Currently, we do only have guideline. We don't have policy about supporting gender non-conforming transgender students. The key differences between guideline are, I would say, threefold. Number one, guideline is issued by the superintendent's office. Policies are drafted, revised, and voted on by the Board of Education. Number two, guidelines can be changed without going through a public debate process. So it could be issued through a memo, could be issued in other ways. Public may not be notified by changing guideline or creation of a guideline. Policies have to go through a deliberate process. And the last one, of course, is public participation. It's just a notification of guidelines and policies being created, but public gets to participate in the creation and the language and revision and, of course, testify in front of a school board about when it comes to time to voting for a policy. I just want to add that note as a sort of an informational piece for everybody. All right, we'll move on to the next question. This one we'll start with Ms. McCoy. The question is, do you believe grooming and indoctrination or other inflammatory and dehumanizing terms are appropriate to describe the LGBTQ+ initiatives undertaken by HCPSS? This, of course, is a yes or no question, but you're welcome to explain your answer.
So clarification, you're asking, do I believe those terms
are appropriate to describe LGBTQ+ initiatives undertaken by HCPSS?
I think those words are judgment words, and I just like with most debatable things in our society, the words you use matter, and how you describe things matter. And so if you describe someone as a groomer, that's your judgment, and the question is, what are you using to base that on? And so no, I don't agree with those kinds of terms being used. I don't believe anyone should be described by someone else. Describing people, words, and workshops that I lead, we say that labels can limit, and they do. And so I try to avoid labeling people, and I think that the best thing that we can do as a society is stop labeling people as a particular thing. Now, when it comes to data and disaggregating data, then we need to identify people. But outside of that, when we're talking about human beings and sharing what someone said, just get what they said and don't put an adjective or anything next to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Newberger?
Thanks. No, those words are absolutely inappropriate, and they're inflammatory, intentionally inflammatory. and absolutely have no place in a conversation of what's happening in our schools. And let's be clear, let's be real about what these words mean and where they're coming from and why. You know, these words are part of, you see them here in Howard County, you see them in discourse all over the country as part of a concerted effort to delegitimize and stigmatize and ultimately harm the LGBTQ community in our country and here in the county. And so you see words like grooming and pedophiles thrown around. This is not an accident, it's not spontaneous. It's a national movement of hate that's here in Howard County as well, and we need to fight that. And this is not politics to me, these are our values. If you value every child, we need to fight back against these words. And I can't say that strongly enough. And that language is being thrown around on social media right now, and it's despicable. And I think anyone whose supporters use those words need to either denounce them or they're complicit.
Thank you. Ms. Adler?
I do not believe that we have grooming or pedophiles actually within HCPSS system, and my focus is really on support of LGBTQ students and their families. So I would disagree that that's being used in the system.
Thank you, Ms. Adler. The next question. In recent years, HCPSS has introduced social emotional learning, or SEL, into curricular programs for students. SEL aims to improve the social and emotional health of students. Do you believe SEL lessons are important in reaching the school system's educational goals? This one we will start with Mr. Newberger.
Great, thanks Ying. Absolutely, SEL is important for our school's goals. Social emotional learning has become a boogeyman in some quarters, which is ridiculous. It's really just teaching what in the workplace we call soft skills, right? How to regulate your emotions, how to interact with others, how to have conflict that don't turn into fistfights, how to behave in a classroom so that you're open to learning. Or for us grown-ups, how to be in a workplace and get jobs done. It's what employers look for in job interviews is, technical skills, but really these soft skills, which is what SEL teaches. So social emotional learning is critical for our students to learn. It's a foundational piece of education. So we absolutely need it in our schools. And it also helps to build healthy school climates where kids feel safe. It's one of the few things that research has shown can help prevent bullying, which is really critical. We have a lot of talk about the bullying policy, of how to punish and what happens after bullying, but we need more focus on how to prevent it. And SEL is one of those ways we can do that. So this is something that's happening in our schools, and I think should happen more. It's really critical to making sure that learning happens.
Thank you. Ms. Adler.
Thank you. I certainly do support the social and emotional learning that will reinforce values and proper ways to deal with conflict and support one another. And so in that fashion, I would support I do support the social and emotional learning.
Thank you. Next question. Oh, I'm sorry. Ms. McCoy.
No problem. I absolutely believe that the first step to any education is taking care of the social emotional needs of children. I just saw a video this morning of an extremely violent school, and a principal just completely felt threatened, and she realized that what was missing is that the children did not feel loved. And once she embraced loving the children, embracing them, it turned the school around. And there are people who think that social emotional issues are not important in education. But if you don't meet a child where they are, I don't care how good of an educator you are. If their minds aren't in the room with you, you're not going to teach them anything. And so it is vital that every teacher, every parent, every staff member understand the importance of the social emotional needs of children and that they get addressed.
Thank you for that. Next question. The HCPSS strategic call to action is a framework that describes the school system's goals, desired outcomes, and performance measures, among others. The current wording includes a vision to embrace diversity and a mission to ensure, quote, social emotional well-being for each student in an inclusive and nurturing environment that closes achievement gap, unquote. Do you support the strategic call to action? We will start this one with Ms. Adler.
Yes, I'll be certainly support that action. That we need support for all students in the schools, and I do agree that we want to support them where they are, who they are, and that's absolutely critical. I view that as a component of teaching in general. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. McCoy?
It's a very impressive statement, the strategic call for action, but my issue is its words, unless there's accountability behind it. And so the superintendent has done a great job of framing just what is needed, but my problem is that there is not enough accountability and holding people responsible for where the children are. And so the statement is wonderful, but I believe that there needs to be more accountability to hold the superintendent responsible for carrying out the very things that the statement says and what we're supposed to stand for in this school system. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Newberger?
Yeah, I'm going to piggyback on that. We have no problem, we have no shortage of good language in this district in our documents, right? I mean, there's a lot of good frameworks, and I think the call to action is important. It says all the right things, and I think it's really important. Now the next step is embodying those things and living those things, and how do we get there, and how are we measuring where we are and measuring how to cross that gap, and that's the piece that's really missing. I mean, don't get me wrong. When I spent years as a management consultant helping federal clients do strategic planning, and I made my employer a lot of money doing that. And strategic plans are important, but without action, without accountability, without real data, they're worthless. And what I think most critically, which I think we're missing to some degree in central office, is a culture of embracing hard truths and taking those hard truths to your boss and standing tall and saying, this is what's really happening, even though we don't really want to talk about this, and that's the conversations that we're missing. We're missing those hard conversations between the board and the superintendent, between the superintendent and his leaders, all the way down. That's what makes a call to action a real thing and not just pretty words.
Thank you. Next question. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's rate of suicide published for 2020, suicide is the second leading cause of death among 10 to 14-year-olds. Research suggests that young children who attempt suicide are 6 times more likely than their peers to attempt suicide again in adolescence. We also know that LGBTQ+ youth are more likely to commit suicide than their peers. Would you like to see suicide prevention and crisis intervention resources provided to elementary school students? We will start with Ms. McCoy.
I'm afraid I'm going to hit that button. I'm sorry. Absolutely, I agree. With the environment that we're living in today, with all of the tension in the atmosphere, our children are feeling that tension. And the fact that we are, fighting all the time, the adults fighting, it spills over into the emotional stability of our children. And so whatever we have to do to make sure that our children are well is what I stand for. And so if we have the resources and we have the people who can do that job, they need to be in every level, elementary, middle, and high. It doesn't matter, but we adults need to dial back some of the foolishness of what we're doing, because it is affecting every one of our children. And we think, it's our position. But a lot of the foolishness that is going on is directly a result of the adults. The adults are causing this world to be the mess that it is. And so if we care about children, we need to dial it back.
I think absolutely agree. We need to work harder at all levels, elementary, middle, and high school, to really give our kids the mental health supports they need to try to curb. It's an epidemic of depression and anxiety and suicide among our youth. I mean, the numbers are terrifying. And I don't think as adults we realize how bad it is. You know, it's hard to really feel what these numbers mean, but they're really, really bad. Second leading cause of death. I mean, that's like I said, I mean, terrifying doesn't even begin to describe it. So the schools are in a tough spot, right? Like, you know, your average middle school, let's say, or elementary school, 700 kids, right? You've got one, maybe 1.5 social worker counselors in that school. Really hard to help kids with that kind of ratio. You've got a psychologist, but they spend their time doing IEP meetings, you know. So, and guess what? Every district in the county and in the country is trying to get more social workers and psychologists for their schools. So there's no easy fixes here. You know, we need to think unconventionally. We need to really partner with resources and organizations in the community. We need to really think about how we can integrate mental health support into everything we do in the schools, from elementary school on up through high school.
Thank you. It's truly heartbreaking to think that you have a young person who is feeling such despair, and we have to do everything that we can do to help mitigate that. It's good to know that we have some additional mental health that's been put into the budget to help our schools, our administrators, and our children, but we're going to have to be ever vigilant, and it is heartbreaking to think that LGBTQ students have such a tough time, and I am pleased to know that we do have additional counselors there to we've done a great job in the schools to give them affirming spaces, and for those children to know that there are people there that can be trusted for them to go to. I think that's very helpful for them. It's moving in the right direction. I recall being in PFLAG meetings 20 years ago. Those parents had nothing to work with, so I think we've come a long way. There's still work to be done, though.
Just to clarify, Ms. Adler, you do support having the support and resources in elementary school. Yes, okay, thank you. Next question. HCPSS recently added a full-time LGBTQ+ specialist position in its central office to provide expertise in directing all LGBTQ+ initiatives. Would you support the continued funding and staffing for that position in the school system's operating budget? We will start with Mr. Newberger.
Yes, absolutely. I think that policy was that position was long overdue. I'm really glad. I'm really proud of CARY for the role you all played in advocating to make that happen. I'm glad the superintendent was listening, and I'm glad the board pushed it through. And now that position has been budgeted, and it's solidified in the district. I think it's really critical to have that specialized expertise in thinking about how to take the policies that the board writes and then executing them in a way that makes sure that things are happening on the ground in the schools, of things we need to be happening to protect our kids and to help them feel safe and learn. And I also think they did a great job in filling that position as well. So yes, absolutely, we need to continue to fund that position. We need to continue to build out the DEI office. We're really just scratching the surface of what we need to be doing to do all the things we say we want to do around diversity in our schools. So actually putting money where our mouth is as a district with this position was a really good first step.
Ms. Adler?
I would support continuing the funding of that position.
Ms. McCoy?
First of all, yes, I absolutely agree with continuing to fund that position, but I want to issue a word of caution. I remember years ago when the school system brought an ombudsman into the county because so many parents weren't being heard. That ombudsman was so overworked. And so you can't rely on one person in their position to go, oh, check the box, we're done. It has to be a continuous, intentional learning and training of all the educators and everyone who interacts with children, including their parents. We need to help everyone in the community to understand the needs of our children, all of our children. And we can't rely on just the social worker, the psychologist, the teacher. It has to be all the community. And so as much educating as we can do, that will help lighten the load of anyone who has that one position. because no one person is going to save the system.
Thank you. Next question. It is critically important that students see themselves and their LGBTQ plus family members in the curriculum. It is also important as they fit in socially that their classmates understand LGBTQ plus identities. On the CARY questionnaire, some school board candidates answered that including LGBTQ plus themes in curriculum should only be done beyond the elementary level. Do you believe elementary school students should be exposed to LGBTQ plus identities as part of their curriculum? Why or why not? We will start this question with Ms. Adler.
Thank you for the question. This is a topic that I am constantly asked about when I go throughout the community, and the introduction of LGBTQ topics in K through third grade is not something that the community is, they're very concerned about it and feel that this is a topic that needs to be discussed at home, and the age appropriateness is a factor that we have to consider at all times when talking about this particular topic. So I am not in support of that. I do think that it's a family matter and they need to discuss it at home with their children.
I believe that the goal is that people live their lives and that children see us live, children learn by seeing us be, right? And so for me, I remember when my daughter was in, I think it was second grade, one of her classmates had two mommies. And we were talking about something and she goes, so-and-so has two mommies. I said, yeah, some people do, and we kept on going. It was no big issue. And so I think if we can learn to live as we do anything else and not make an issue of a thing that may not be an issue to a child, let them learn to live as we live and not seek to, I guess, specifically in the schools, to direct the student one way or the other. If they have faculty who are gay, let them live their lives. If they're children who identify a specific way, let them live their lives. I don't think that there's a need to make an issue of a thing, but I think as we make it a normal way of being, I don't see that there's a problem.
I talk to a lot of people in the community about this too, and I hear something different, so I guess it's a pretty big community. Yes, absolutely, LGBTQ needs to be in the curriculum in an age-appropriate way, which is what we're talking about, an age-appropriate way. When we hear that LGBTQ issues are something that should be discussed at home, or that's a family issue, that's saying this is a shameful thing, or this is something that's too advanced for kids. We're talking about sex. We're not talking about sex or sexuality here. We're talking about a basic part of the human fabric of our society. And so, yes, absolutely in an age-appropriate way, our curriculum needs to be inclusive so that LGBTQ kids and kids from LGBTQ families can see themselves in that curriculum, and so that other kids are exposed as well to just the inclusiveness of this community in Howard County. And I have tremendous faith in our educators that they would do so in an age-appropriate way. And I think failing to do that sends a message, and I don't believe that's the message we want to send.
Can I respond to that, please? I disagree that if somebody does not want their child to hear or to learn about this at a certain time in their life, if the parent believes that the child is not prepared or is not ready to understand, I think that's a parent's decision. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's anything negative. I just think the parent should have the ability to introduce at the time that they think is appropriate for their child. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I have a follow-up question to that, in which case everyone will be given 30 seconds to answer. In response to what especially Ms. Adler mentioned, there are some community members and parents especially concerned about age appropriateness of LGBTQ themed content in K through 3 curriculum. Do you believe that parents have the same concern about age appropriateness for non-LGBTQ content in the same grades? And everyone will have 30 seconds. And I would ask the audience to please refrain from discussing among yourselves. This is really in respect to everyone's time, especially the candidates who are sharing their knowledge and their stance on issues. Did everybody get that question?
Can you say it again? I'm sorry.
Sure, of course. So in response to some community members' concerns about age appropriateness for the LGBTQ content in elementary school, that was the original question, but to the Ms. Adler especially mentioned K-3 curriculum. Are the same community members' parents concerned about age appropriateness of non-LGBTQ content in the curriculum? We will go by the same order, and you have 30 seconds, Ms. Adler.
I have had parents say to me that some of the content is getting earlier and earlier as time goes by, and they are uncomfortable with that. So, you know, irrespective of the LGBTQ, some of the content and discussions about sexuality and so forth are getting shared with students earlier and earlier. So it doesn't speak specifically only to LGBTQ, but I would say that there is some concern about the age appropriateness of other as well. Thank you.
I think the key is age appropriate, and I remember when my children were younger, that the advice was answer every question that they have, right? Answer every question. I'm telling you, that was the worst advice ever, because I believe that our children need to find out, you know, do the research, then we can talk about it. Make them think rather than saying what I think, because it really didn't work very well. Thank you.
When we draw lines and say that these are topics that we just can't discuss in an elementary school for whatever reason, because you know, that's sending a message. That's saying these are things that are not okay with some people in our community, and we can't be okay with that not being okay with people. We don't not talk about having Black people in our community in our curriculum. We don't talk about we don't pretend like we don't have people of Asian American descent in our curriculum. We have LGBTQ people in our community. Our curriculum should reflect that. And anything different tells me that you see those people in a different way, and you value them in a different way, and that's unacceptable.
Can I respond to that?
Sure.
I would disagree with that. I would say that parents do have to still, you're talking about elementary school children, when parents' rights do not disappear when they take their children and drop them off at school. So I think that we do have to remember that some children are just not prepared to take certain information at a certain age. It may need to be delayed for some children. And I think the parent has the right to make sure that it's age appropriate, what they would determine what is age appropriate, particularly in elementary school. Thank you.
I mean, I don't know if we want to turn this into an open debate.
Not officially, and we'll not give everyone a limited time for the debate, but.
I don't know. This is a pretty telling double standard that parents have problems with this in their curriculum. And to me, there's a lot we're not saying here today at the podium, and I think this is the tip of the iceberg of what people are not saying. But you know, parents are not comfortable with this. That's fine. Have a conversation, and the educators can explain it. We have a rigorous process in place that makes sure that our curriculum is age appropriate. And I have a lot of faith in the educators who've dedicated their lives to the education of children, that process is solid. And parents and the community members have a lot of input into that process. Policy 1080 and everything that makes sure the curriculum is age appropriate. So I don't know what part would be inappropriate for a second grader to read a book about a child with two moms, or reading, having a teacher read a book about, a kid with a family that's different than other kids in that class.
I just want to just say that age appropriateness, again. And if there is, I can't imagine, and maybe I'm being foolish, but I can't imagine that there is, that students are being taught about a particular way of being in elementary school, indicating that a child has two mommies, two daddies, mixed families, showing them in pictures, not making an issue of it, but letting it just be, to me, is where we should be. Yeah, so that's all I'll say.
Thank you for that short and lively debate. We'll move on to the next question. To what age groups of students, if any, is it appropriate for teachers and other staff members to relate their LGBTQ plus identity, or that they have LGBTQ plus family members? We will start this question with Ms. McCoy.
We use the word relate this time. The last time, I think the question was disclose, and I thought that's a kind of a triggering word, disclose. I believe that, I know as an educator, I did not go out of my way to share with my students anything about my family. I didn't have pictures. That's just who I am. And there were other teachers who had pictures and everything, and that was there. That's the way they decorated their room. But I did every now and then make a joke or something about a family member or something like that. And so the students learned I was married. They learned I had children over time, but it wasn't an issue. And I think it needs that all staff members, teachers in particular, should be able to live their lives as they live them in front of their students. If you're an educator, you're educating students, and you're not telling them about your lifestyle or your life, the way you live your life, or the way that you are. They don't know if I'm a hunter. They don't know any of that unless I share it. And so I think that all educators should have the right to be who they are and share what they want as appropriate in the age setting.
I think a lot of kids at a certain age think their teachers live in the buildings. And I think LGBTQ staff can and should feel free to share, just relate anything that their straight peers would as well, at any age limit. So pre-K on up. I mean, this is not something shameful. This is who you are as a teacher, and you should be free. Our educators should be free to bring themselves to work. And like Jackie said, if you have a picture at your desk with your family, you should be able to do that no matter what your family looks like. And if you're talking about your spouse in a way with your students, it doesn't matter, what gender that spouse is. I think this is absolutely what we need to create an environment where we are attracting the best talent to come teach our kids, because people don't want to teach in schools that are not tolerant, I think. I mean, some teachers do, but the most, if we want to attract the next generation of young, great teachers to Howard County, we need to be a district that embraces staff, all kinds of staff of every part of the demographic, and that means making sure that our LGBTQ staff feel every bit as comfortable as their peers.
I think it's, I would rather see that we have teachers that are really focusing on getting our students on track with their core education and that sort of thing. I've been working a very, very long time, and when I go to my job, I really do my job. And that's just who I am, as Ms. McCoy has shared with herself. That's just who I am, and that's how I view when you have a work responsibility. You just do your work. And I think at some point, maybe we have to rely on our teachers to kind of take the signal whether or not, if it makes a child feel more comfortable and they get to know that student and it makes them feel comfortable, that's a great opportunity. That's a great opportunity to show yourself. But in general, I'd rather see that we're really focusing on getting our kids back on track.
Thank you. Follow-up question to that. Mr. Newberger mentioned pictures that a lot of the teachers and staff have on their desks in the classrooms. And Ms. Adler mentioned the importance of focusing on teaching our students, getting them back on track in terms of academic performance, and there's a lot of learning loss. I think we can all agree with that. So here's a follow-up question. It is a common practice for teachers at all levels, including elementary levels, to speak of their spouse or display family photos on their desks, including the classroom. Do you believe, two parts, do you believe, one, it is appropriate for cis-hetero teachers and staff to relate their identities in an elementary school? Second part is, do you believe that by doing so, they are interfering with their primary task, which is to help the students learn and grow, which is what education in our schools should be. And I would give everyone a minute to answer this a little bit longer question. Do I need to repeat that?
Yes.
Okay. It is a common practice for teachers at all levels to speak of their spouse or display family photos on their desk, including in elementary classrooms. Do you believe it is appropriate for cis-hetero teachers and staff to relate their identities in an elementary school? And do you believe by doing so, it is interfering with their primary task of helping the students learn and grow in the schools, elementary schools? I will start this one with, lost my, Ms. McCoy. Yes, okay.
I figured the cycle. I'm not sure what you mean by relate your identity. So, can you explain that?
Sure,
I'm
I
not
can
sure what you
clarify
mean by
that. Well, we gave an example. Having a picture of your family on the desk is relate your identity.
Okay, I see
You are
what you mean.
showing, here's me,
Okay.
here's my husband, here's
Okay.
my children. And oftentimes in conversations, talking to kids, students of all levels, a lot of times we hear teachers say, let's call her Mrs. Smith. She'll say, my husband and I went to the beach last week. Or, my daughter and I, went fishing last week. That is disclosing and relating their own sexuality, if you're saying your husband, from a woman's perspective. So that's one example. There are many, many different multiple combinations, so that's one way to ask.
Okay, I understand. It was just, I wasn't clear. Again, I've said, like, people live their lives. I don't understand where that would be a problem. As a part of your conversation, if you're out to make a point of it, then it's like, why? Just live. If you're speaking of your family members, your maybe a vacation or something like that, whatever it is, it should just be a part of conversation, not a pointed, I'm going to do this, because then it makes it something more than just education, right? We're educating based on our area of expertise, and that's what we focus on really putting out there, and everything else is extraneous. And so who we are in our personal lives, we discuss it as is pertinent to the, when we're engaging with our students. So that's where I am with that.
I absolutely think it's appropriate for straight cisgendered educators to do that, and I think it's appropriate for LGBTQ educators to do it too, in an appropriate way for both groups. I mean, one of my children had a teacher last year who was an overshare to the detriment, I think, of that class. And that's problematic, right? No matter what the relationships are at home, but that's not the norm in our district. But I think it's important that that educators can bring themselves to work, and I think that does go to, are we providing our children with the best education? This is not a sideshow. This is part of the core. How do we educate our kids the best? I was talking to an educator a little while back who has taught in this district, worked in this district for 22 years, and they've been in the closet that whole time because they haven't felt safe in the schools they've worked in. And they're still a great educator, but what a shame to have to live your life like that. And none of our educators should feel like they can't do that in their workplace. And that, to me, is a core educational issue of how we best help our kids learn, is we make sure we have the best educators and we make them feel like they can bring their best selves to work.
This is a very interesting conversation, and I believe that my response to this particular question is that it's really not about the teachers, it's about the students. And are we focusing on our students and giving them what they need to be academically successful. And if that means that we're just focusing on the education as opposed to talking about their personal lives, I just think that we've got a lot of work to do in the schools, and we've got to be focused on education as we go off task there in many different ways. It's not helpful to our children. Thank you.
Briefly follow up with that. To me, education is very, very complicated, and it's also very simple. When you cut to the core, education is the student and the teacher and their relationship, and that's how the learning happens. So to say you want to focus on the students in this question, that's what we're doing. That's what the teachers spend their lives doing, is teaching these kids. So this is all about the kids. That's why the teachers are there. This is about the students. And so I don't think we can quite dismiss this issue as being not relevant to the education of our kids because we're talking about our staff in this way. This is all about educating our kids. I don't think you can separate the two.
No? Okay. I have a quick follow-up question. Are you all familiar with the terms windows and mirrors? Okay. So a quick follow-up here is windows. For those of you who are not familiar, this was a term coined by an educator. Windows means the students can see the world through the window where they see a diverse world. In Howard County, we do embody that kind of a diversity. And mirrors, of course, is to see themselves reflected through the mirrors, in the mirrors, that all kinds of identities by all definition. So the conversation we just had made me think of the relationship between teacher and classroom with students. Is not just a crafty, the teacher gives the knowledge to the students and focusing on their education, therefore the teacher's there as a robot or a tool to pass on the knowledge they have. But rather a relationship, as Mr. Newberger said. But focusing on education involves teaching them and respecting them as human beings. And Windows and Mirrors is in that way to highlight why a diverse environment where they can see themselves and they can also see through the world is so important for a student in elementary school or any classroom to see their teacher as human beings who have different identities, including LGBTQ identities, would be important to see the diversity of the world. And sometimes for a student who's struggling with their own gender identity or sexuality, and we know kids as young as 3 can learn about their gender identity. So it's not too early in elementary school to talk about these topics in age-appropriate matter. And so I guess here's my question. I'll get off my soapbox. And my follow-up question is, do you believe it is important for the students to see diversity in their teachers, including there's race, gender, and sexuality, and sometimes the teachers can be immigrant, and we talk about a lot of different people with disabilities and a lot of the different kinds of, we have a long list of definitions for diversity. Do you believe it's important for students at all levels to see the diversity in their teachers and for them to be able to live their authentic self, for them in this case referring to the teachers, so that students can see them as role models and adult in the room who are maybe similar to me in different ways or different in other ways, so they're authentic people.
Can I take that one first, because I'm going to forget.
Of course, sorry.
I can relate. When I was in high school, I took drafting, and my drafting teacher was a tiny little architect, right, who identified as white. She never once treated me like I was different or any of the other students. She never once said that women in architecture are, rare. She never made an issue of it. But she's the reason why my name is spelled with a Y today. She didn't tell me, but I think she knew that when the state drafting contest came up, that I would, be judged if they knew that there was a girl. And so I used a Y and I won the contest. And I look back on that and I'm like, why did she do that? But I think that's what she was doing. but there was never an effort to overtly make me feel different or less than, to say, well, you gotta be better, you gotta do this. No pressure put on me. She just taught me and was an excellent educator, and I think that's what educators should do. They should look out for their children, their students, and do the absolute best for them, looking forward and helping them to become who they are.
I think it's absolutely essential that we have, as diverse a group of educators in each of our schools as we can. It's really important that students can see and relate, to members of the faculty in their schools. And it's hard for the district to do that. And that's a constant struggle for the district to recruit a diverse pool of candidates, but we need to keep working on that really hard. It's always a struggle to get teachers of color to come teach here. They're highly sought after, but that's something we work on, and I think the same thing should be true for all aspects of diversity. But most importantly, we talk a lot about hiring when we talk about how do we get a diverse staff. The other piece is how do we retain them, and that's by what is the culture like in these buildings, and that goes again to the leadership in the schools. Are the principals being the inclusive, strong leaders they need to be, so that every educator in that building feels like they can bring their best selves to work, so that they can then be their best selves to their students and do the best job they can educating the students. So I think it's really important for our students to be able to see themselves in the staff lounge when they peek through the window, and I think it's really important for the school culture as a whole.
Windows and mirrors. I certainly feel very strongly that good educators and good teachers offer themselves every day to their students by their devotion to their students. There are teachers that will be interfacing with our students for 12 years in the school system, and each one brings a different characteristic, a different strength, and adds things. For example, just as McCoy's example. So I am reluctant to narrow that down into lots of different types of labels, because I think as across the board, the teachers that interface with our students bring some measure of something very important to them every day, and it can be many different ways. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question. Recently, we have seen claims such as, quote, radical gender ideology is infiltrating our schools, unquote, circulating even in Howard County. What is your position on injecting this kind of rhetoric into discussions about critical issues impacting the lives of LGBTQ youth in our community? We'll start with Mr. Newberger.
Yeah, I think that kind of language is really inflammatory and dangerous. I think if people are living in I don't know, to some people, just tolerant schools where, like we said, that are diverse and tolerant and inclusive for the students and the faculty. To some people, that's a radical thing. To me, that's the norm and should be the norm. So I guess it's where you're sitting and it's how you see it. But I think that kind of language is really is harmful and dangerous, and it shows that that we need to fight really hard to not just advance all the progress we've made in making our schools welcoming places for LGBTQ students and staff, but we need to defend the gains we've had. That's kind of where we're at right now. So I don't think that language helps at all in advancing, good outcomes, good educational outcomes for our kids. But I guess that's where we are in this country today.
I'm not a fan at all of ratcheting up and getting things to be very emotional. I think it's very important that we work together. We have differences of opinion. We have LGBTQ community. We have folks that are outside of the LGBTQ community, and we need to be able to work together. We need to be able to get to a place where we can support each other. And terms like radical or they're coming after our LGBTQ kids is not helpful, and it's divisive, and we really have to be very, very careful that we don't go there, and we're making sure that we're reaching out all the time to see who we can bring together to support and encourage everyone to work together and support each other.
The radical gender ideology, the labeling of that, is that what we're talking, is that? Okay. I grew up in Richmond, Virginia during the 50s and 60s, and there was all kinds of things going on in my community. There were protests I knew nothing about. My family did not get me involved in all of that. My community did not bring those kinds of stresses into the lives of the children. We just lived our lives. And so as a dyslexic child, that was my struggle, right? But there was never a situation where I felt girls couldn't do math, that I couldn't achieve because I was an African American. There was never that kind of thing because it wasn't discussed around me, so I didn't get that message. But when we have these contentious issues constantly paraded in front of our children, we're labeling people, labeling beliefs, and just bombarding our children with those messages. It impacts them. It impacts them, and we as adults have got to stop.
Can I reply? So Tootie was throwing a little shade at me, so I gotta reply here. Yeah, I mean, there's escalating and being emotional, and then there's facing facts and reacting to them, right? It's not an exaggeration to say that there are people coming after our LGBTQ kids today. Open your newspaper, open your phone. It's happening in Virginia where they're trying to stop trans kids from being there who they need to be. It's in Florida, it's in Texas, it's in all sorts of places. This is reality. Whereas radical gender ideology is not reality. And you mentioned differences of opinion. I'm all about us having differences of opinion about lots of things, but we cannot have differences of opinion about the basic humanity of each other, right? And of our kids. There are things that we need to be common values. There's no opinion about whether we need to value our LGBTQ kids and make our schools safe for everyone. That's not up for opinion. That's how our schools need to be. And I'm going long and I'll stop.
I want to be very, very clear that, just so that there's no misunderstanding, I have to defend myself here. There is absolutely nothing in me that would ever want any LGBTQ child to feel uncomfortable or unsafe. It's heartbreaking to think that any child, for any reason, wouldn't feel accepted, and we just have different opinions about how we go about it. And I think that's the work that we have to do to make sure that as a community, we put our arms around all the children. Thank you.
When it comes to protecting our children's mental health, their emotional health, I think that because of these cell phones and the World Wide Web, all that they have access to, it is incumbent upon parents to really be open to talk to their children about whatever concerns they have, that the community be prepared to talk with children about what concerns they have, because this world is very different from when I grew up. And so we really have to be on target to make sure that we are minding the wellness of our children. Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to our last question. If elected, how do you plan to work collaboratively with any fellow board members who may disagree with you, probably even strongly, on your views with regard to LGBTQ plus issues? We'll start with Ms. Adler.
Collaboratively is a very important word, and it's one that I use often. I do think that when, as I said before, I just think that we do have to really make sure that we are working, if you're talking about specifically LGBTQ issues. I will tell you a story. I have a very close friend who learned that their child, probably at a about high school age, they learned that their child was gay. They were absolutely heartbroken and devastated at the thought that that child had suffered for such a long time and they weren't aware of it. So that's really where I've come to the table on this. We have to figure out how to find those children and help them so that we're looking for the next Tim Cook. I mean, we want them to be free emotionally so that they can learn well and not suffer with the exhaustion of constantly having to worry about themselves.
How will I work collaboratively with other board members? That's the question, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
including those who may disagree with you,
Okay.
strongly disagree.
I think that we have to be willing to listen to one another. And as I said earlier, in our workshops, we say labels can limit. And so if I am going into any kind of engagement with a board member with the idea that, oh, they're that kind of person, and they have this kind of belief, then I'm not going to hear them with a clear ear, because it's going to be clouded by judgment. And so I want to listen for the truth behind whatever someone says and understand what it is that their concerns are, rather than taking an adversarial approach and thinking that, oh, I'll never agree with them. I've done enough work, in education and in workshops and in dialogues with people, that I know that listening is the most important thing. We have two ears, right, to listen, and we speak with one mouth. And so I believe that we have to go into it understanding that we need to understand and listen.
Yeah, so you're seeing candidate, Dan, right? I'm fiery, I'm passionate, I'm explaining my values to you all. Board member Dan or committee member Dan has those same values, believes those same things, operates in a different way because it's a different setting with different goals, right? I'm very pragmatic about how I want my values to become real, right? I'm all about compromising, building coalitions, finding common ground in a board setting, because that's how you get things done, right? Politics is the act of getting things done. So please don't take my passion here for an inability to collaborate and work together, because to me, having strong values and not being smart about how to work towards them is just that's not productive. And I'm all about trying to advance the things I believe in a smart way. So yeah, I am open to working with anyone. Even when we strongly disagree, there is common ground. I think even with people running for Board of Ed, we have a lot of common ground. And when you're on a board, when you have a job to do, you find that common ground to advance the things you believe in. When you disagree, you work together as much as you can. You respectfully disagree when you have to. And then the next day it's another issue, so you wipe the slate clean and you get back to work for the voters of Howard County and the kids of Howard County. That's how I see it.
Thank you. That concludes the question, answer, and unplanned debate portion of the forum. Candidates are now welcome to give a 1-minute closing statement. We will begin with Ms. Adler.
Thank you to CARY for hosting this event. I want to assure everyone that I will continue to work in a collaborative manner to address issues. It's clear to me that our students are in a delicate place right now, and we have to move forward as a county of leaders to seriously impact their future. Our school system is fragile. Funding, staffing, mental health, special education, buildings, transportation are all very tenuous. Now more than ever, we need to work together, not only as a board, but throughout the county for the health, education, safety of all of our children and the community at large. Thank you.
I wish I could read my statements and talk, but I can't because I'm dyslexic. And so I probably leave out half the things I need to say, but I want you to know this, that I am in education because I'm passionate about learning. I'm passionate about our children having every opportunity to be who they are and to become who they want to be. And so on the board, I am going to be the person holding, the superintendent, and anyone else that I can accountable for doing just that, allowing students the opportunities that they need and they deserve to become who they were created to be, regardless. And there should be no agenda that gets in the way of a child becoming who they were created to be. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do it with gusto. I don't play. I don't play. I don't play when it comes to children. And I will defend anything that has to be done to help our children succeed. Thank you.
Now, this has been a great conversation. I hope everyone here walks out of here with a good view of kind of where we're all at on these issues. I'm really passionate about this. I'm passionate about making sure our LGBTQ kids and staff have the right experiences they deserve in our schools. And I'm passionate about all sorts of things with our schools right now. You know, we're in a really precarious place with our schools. The most angry I got this week, and I've been talking about book bannings and all sorts of things, but the most angry thing I got this week was as I was researching the capital budget issues of our schools. You know, we're $630 million in the hole with deferred maintenance. I mean, these are enormous problems, and I'm passionate about those problems too, because my God, we're not doing right by our kids in this district right now. So, yeah, I think we need people with passion. I think we need people who are problem solvers, who are strategic, and I bring those skills with me. And I encourage everyone to check out our websites to learn more about where we are. This has been a really interesting slice of our platforms, and I really appreciate CARY having the opportunity, giving us the opportunity to dive deep into these issues. So thanks again for being here.
Thank you so much. I want to thank all the candidates for being here today and giving us candid conversations and engaging conversations. I will now hand over the microphone to Stacy Ha, who is our secretary for CARY's board, for her closing remarks.
We just want to thank you, Tootie, Jackie, and Dan for being here today and sharing your thoughts and hopes for our school district. And we thank you everyone else who joined us here today, both in person and from home, and those who are going to watch this later as a recording. We're just thankful for everyone who cares enough about the future of education and also the well-being and thriving of our LGBTQIA children and staff and community. So as we close our time here today, we wanted to remind everyone that Howard County Pride Festival is happening. It's coming up very soon on Sunday, October 9th at 11 a.m. at Meriwether Park. And we look forward to seeing many of you there. And on your way out, you'll see a table that has some CARY literature that you can take home and further review at your own convenience. Thank you again for coming to this forum today.